Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. I want you all to think about compounding interest. The Social Security Administration and things like that will talk about how compounding interest is a great thing and it can make you much richer. It's making your money work for you. It's making your money grow itself so that you end up much richer. I want to point out how preposterous this is because compounding interest is basically a two-edged sword, right? Now this is not going to be a direct, exact comparison. Like inflation is not compounding interest in reverse. It's not exactly the same, but it kind of is. It's very similar, right? Which I'm going to point out. Inflation, in other words, the growing of the currency supply, the decreasing of the purchasing power of the dollar due to money printing, is basically the opposite of what is thought of as compounding interest, right? They act like compounding interest is only a good thing, right? Like they never talk about what's essentially the dark side of compounding interest. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's similar. Inflation is kind of like the dark side of compounding interest. It's the fact that as your purchasing power is stolen more from by inflation, this means you are able to invest less and thus earn less purchasing power because you're investing less purchasing power. Like, when you invest less, you can earn less. So when they steal your purchasing power by, inflation, by devaluing your saved dollars, this means you are investing less and therefore are earning less money from your investment, even if assuming it's a successful investment, which it might not even be. You know what I mean? So, you're investing less purchasing power, even though you may be investing the same amount of dollars, right? Like one year you might invest like $5,000. Another year, the next year, you invest $5,000 more dollars in it, but those second $5,000 are worth less because there's been inflation and everything costs more now. So you're actually investing less, even though you're investing the same amount of dollars. So then you're earn less return. You know what I mean? Because the return you get will be the same, perhaps in dollar terms, as what you made on that first thousand the first year. But those, the dollars that you earn in compensation for investing that money, if it's a successful investment, those dollars also buy less. You see? So inflation, this is like, how it works. It doesn't just steal your purchasing power. It steals the purchasing power that you could have made with that purchasing power had it not been stolen. You know what I mean? You might be even investing more dollars than you were 10 years ago, but you're probably investing less purchasing power. And because you're investing less purchasing power, you are thus able to grow less purchasing power. Your purchasing power that is saved is able to increase in purchasing power far less because it was less purchasing power to begin with. Making 1% interest on $1 billion is a lot of money. It's $10 million. But making 1% interest on $10 is just 10 cents. So the more money you have invested, the more money you are able to make. Or rather, more accurately, the more purchasing power you have invested, the more purchasing power you are able to accrue as a result, as a return for that investment, assuming it's a successful investment. Whether that return comes in the form of dividends or a stock going up or the interest given to you by a bond or by a bank for keeping your money in a bank account, or whether it comes from the increasing purchasing power of gold if you hold your money in the form of gold, right? Like you get purchasing power by putting your money in the right things. You know what I mean? But you're missing out on the profits of investing your money because with inflation, right? Like you're missing out on a lot of the profits or even all of the profits of investing your money when there's inflation, because inflation is making the purchasing power of your savings less and less, right? So you can buy fewer and fewer investment vehicles like property, vehicles which can not only preserve your purchasing power but increase it over time, assuming you rent the property out, assuming you rent the house or the duplex or whatever out. So you're not just losing out on the purchasing power that you lose due to inflation, both from your paycheck buying less and less, and from your savings being able to buy less and less every year, that you keep your, every year at least, that you keep your savings in the form of dollars, right? Whether in a bank, a bond, or at a home, or at your home in a wall safe, right? But you're also losing out on the purchasing power that purchasing power would have been able to earn for you if you had not lost that purchasing power to the ravages of inflation. You're making less in purchasing power each year, thus being able to buy less gold. Gold which appreciates with time. And so you're losing out on the purchasing power that your gold would have preserved because you never received that purchasing power in the first place because your wages did not go up enough that year to compensate for inflation. But you're also losing out on the purchasing power that gold would have made for you as gold goes up on average 2.5% above inflation every year when averaged over a few decades. Some years it does nothing, and then some years it goes up way more than 2.5%. So you average it, and it's about 2.5% per year, if I remember correctly, because I think Blank P said that in one of his videos. Didn't just say it, he showed the graphs or whatever and all that. And then you're losing out on the purchases you could have made with that increased purchasing power, right? Like if you had, invested $10,000 and there was no insurance, and you invested it in the stock market and it went up by 10%, you're not just missing out on, the full value of that 10,000 due to inflation, decreasing it down to you probably 9,500 in purchasing power over a year. And you're not only also losing out on that extra 10%, well, I guess you are making the 10%, but the 10% is having to make up for the 5% you lost due to inflation, right? But you're also missing out on that extra 5% that you could have made if there had been no inflation. You're missing out on what that could have bought you. That is, more property or more stocks or whatever, which would have also earned interest. So you're missing out on that compounding because of interest, you see. So, those purchases, you could have purchased more investments with that, added purchasing power you would have had there been no inflation, and then you would have, got more purchasing power from those investments going up as well, right? Like if you had kept gold and let it go up in value over a 10-year period, then sold the gold when it was overvalued, and then bought stocks when they were undervalued, and then held those while the gold went down in value, and then you bought back the gold when the stocks are overvalued and the gold is once again undervalued. You can't do that as much because you never made that increase in purchasing power of gold because you were never able to buy that extra gold because of your paycheck buying less and less each year due to inflation and the fact that your job, like most jobs, does not give you a cost of living adjustment raise in pay. And if it does give you a cost of living adjustment, a raise every year, it usually doesn't give you the full amount that would really be needed to make up for inflation. Right? You have to understand that if you are making 4% in interest each year on your money, whether it's in stocks, a bank account, bonds, or something else, you're actually losing 1% of your purchasing power of that savings every year because inflation today is about 5% per year. And you also have to take into account that what you're doing to obtain that 4% per year, like put it in stocks or whatever, is something that is a risk. Like what if the stocks go down? It's like if you kept your money in a wall safe, year after year, yeah, it's going down 5% every year, and that's a lot. But at the same time, like, you're not at risk of, the stock market crashing and losing 50 or 90% of the value of your stock. Or that particular stock, if you instead of having it in a mutual fund, you have it in just a few stocks, then those stocks, or one of them, or maybe all of them, could go down to literally zero. Those companies could go bankrupt, and then you got nothing. You know what I mean? So, like, you're taking a risk when you try to get that 4% or whatever, by putting in the stock market or wherever else. So that's not risk-free. You're taking a big risk by doing that, or a moderate risk, So, like, the fact that you're taking on added risk to try to compensate for inflation, and a lot of times it doesn't even compensate for inflation, but that doesn't nullify the risk. You're still at risk. So that's a terrible situation, you know what I mean? It's almost like maybe it would be better just to keep it in a wall safe at home, even though you're losing a ton of money every year, but that's no good either. Cause like I said, you're losing all that money, but gold appreciates 2.5% per year above inflation. And it furthermore does so with zero risk to your money, zero risk, assuming that you hold on to your gold for 40 years or more and refuse to sell it any earlier than that. But about getting 4% and losing on, like on your stocks or whatever, them going up 4% per year, but losing 5% of those savings to inflation, like losing 5% of your purchasing power, you may not think that losing only 1% of your purchasing power each year is that bad. But, like I said before, you're having the exact same dollars of your savings be taxed with that 1% over and over again. So it's not like you lose 1% and it's just done. No, you lose 1% every year, over and over, the same dollars, whether they're in dollars at a safe at home or dollars in a bank or dollars in the stock market. It's the same thing. You're losing 1% on that same money over and over and over again. It's an infinite tax. So over a few decades, that ends up being a huge percentage of your wealth that was stolen by way of inflation. And at the same time, you're also having your paycheck go down by 5% every year, assuming you don't get any kind of inflation raise to make up for inflation, And if you get a cost of living raise each year of 2%, you're still taking a 3% pay cut each year when inflation is 5% each year as it is today, right? And has been for several years now. So, taking a 3% pay cut every year, that's no good. You're making less and less in terms of purchasing power. Sure, you're getting paid the same amount of dollars, even more dollars actually, if you're getting a 2% raise each year, but you're making less and less in purchasing power. Every year you make less purchasing power than the year before. And you also have to realize that when you have your money invested in stocks or bonds or whatever, you're getting paid that 2% or 5% or whatever in compensation for you taking a risk. Why should you have to take a risk when the reward that you're getting for taking that risk is not even something that profits you because it doesn't even make up for inflation? Like when you're getting 4% on your money by having it in the stock market, but inflation is 5%. That's crazy, right? That's like owning a bond with a negative interest rate. You're paying them, if there were no inflation, but you owned a bond with a negative interest rate, that's basically what the situation you're in. If you're in stocks and they're going up 4% per year, but inflation is like 5 or 6% or more a year. That's like owning a bond with a negative interest rate when there's no inflation. You're paying them to loan them money. That's insane. Someone would have to be totally crazy to hold such a bond. In such a situation as this, where bonds are negative interest and inflation is 5% per year, or inflation is 5% per year, but you have your money somewhere else and you're making less than that much, less than 5%, right? When it's this situation, that's terrible. You know what I mean? That's absolutely terrible. And it's like you get almost no interest to have your money in a checking or a savings account in a bank, and yet if the bank goes under, you're going to be bailed in. They're going to take your money if you have more than $250,000. If you have less than $250,000, you're going to be reimbursed by the FDIC, but they're printing up the money. They're stealing your money by inflation to give it right back to you to quote unquote insure you. So literally, you're still being robbed. It's crazy. Like the FDIC is worthless. Basically, it's absolutely worthless. And, the stock market's heavily overvalued already, so you're putting your money at huge risk if you put it into stocks. So it's like, where do you put your money? Really, the only place to put your money is gold or silver or whatever other precious metal. For real. Rhodium, palladium, platinum, pick your poison or whatever. Well, I guess not pick your poison because they're good, but, pick your blessing or whatever. Pick whichever precious metal you want, but really you have to have your money there because it's insane to have it anywhere else. It's insane to have it in the stock market. It's insane to have it in a bank where you get no interest, but yet your money is not even yours anymore. You're an unsecured creditor. That's literally legally not your money anymore when you put it in the bank. You can't really get cash out with like 2,000 or I think it's like 5,000 or more or whatever. If you just ask for a few $1,000s out of your bank, like 5,000 or something, they'll treat you like a drug dealer. They'll treat you like a criminal. They'll make you do all this stuff. You got to sign all these paperwork and blah, blah, blah. Like Jim Rickard talked about it in his book, The New Case for Gold. He said they'll treat you like a drug dealer if you ask for just a few $1,000s of your own money in cash from the bank. Like he said, the government has already won the war on cash, But yeah, so there's really nowhere to put your money other than precious metals, at least at this present point in human history, at least in this country. But mainly, all across the world, they're pretty much in the same situation, if not worse. So really, precious metals is the only sane place to put your to put your money. Precious metals is the only sane place to put your money. The stock market can even go up, and yet you're losing money because inflation could be going up 10% per year, but the stock market's going up 7% per year. So essentially, the stock market then is going down 3% per year. It's called an invisible crash. Mike Maloney has talked about it, In such a world as this, there's no intelligent thing to do but to own precious metals because precious metals not only make up for inflation with zero risk whatsoever as long as you hold them and don't sell them, but they also go up even more than inflation when averaged over the decades, and thus by holding gold and silver, you make a return without taking any risk at all, assuming you hold on to the precious metals for decades and never sell. Well, not never sell, but, don't sell ever within that 40-year period or longer. You make more money than inflation. You take zero risk. It's all upside and no downside. And the longer you hold the gold and silver, the more it goes up in purchasing power. And therefore, the richer you are, or the richer your descendants are, if you pass it on to your grandkids or whatever. Your silver or your gold or whatever. Sure, you're still having to deal with the fact that inflation is making sure you're taking a pay cut each year, but that's why we also need to overthrow the government or form our own community that is incredibly well armed and which grows all the food that it needs on the commune's property, within the commune's large walls, and which is full of people willing to die to keep the cops and the military out of the commune so that the commune can live exactly how it wants to, and that will enable the commune to not have to pay taxes, which will make up for making less and less money each year. Especially if the commune is doing eugenic breeding with ugly but smart women, using the sperm of guys with great health, very high IQs, and far above average memories so that the commune can make money online and won't have to work for a salary, which is constantly decreasing. The commune could also build its own products that it sells to outsiders and thus make money that way. It's very important to understand that you're having your savings robbed by inflation and you're taking a pay cut each year when there's inflation because if you're not getting a 5%, raise each year. And whatever raises you do get, such as when you get a promotion, is not a cost of living raise, but is a raise you received due to you having earned it. You worked hard and you got a promotion. And that's a promotion that if you had lived in a country that used a sound money standard, like a gold standard or a Bitcoin standard, you probably would have gotten that raise and that promotion anyway. So it's not like you can view your raises and your promotions as like some kind of, making up for inflation, because inflation didn't give you the raise. Inflation didn't give you the promotion. You worked hard, and that's why you got the promotion, right? Like maybe you could say that some of the raises you get if you don't get a promotion are perhaps due to them trying to make up for inflation, but if you get a promotion and you therefore get more money, you can't say that that's due to inflation. You would have got that anyway if the country were on a sound money standard. You see? But yet you also would not be taking a pay cut every year in the form of a rising cost of living due to inflation, because if you lived in a country with a sound money standard, there would be no inflation. People today do not earn more money every year, or they don't get big enough raises every year to make up for inflation. Even if you get a cost of living raise meant to make up for the effect of inflation, it's probably based on the duplicitously calculated CPI, which itself actually admits that it's not a measure of inflation. And thus, if you get a cost of living raise each year, it's probably only about 2%. And since inflation is about 5% right now and has been for the last several years, at least, if not for a far longer period of time than that, I don't know how long it's been. It's probably been at least like the last 10 or 20 years we've had 5% inflation, maybe longer. But yeah, this means that even though you're receiving a 2% raise each year, like I said before, you're basically taking a 3% pay cut each year. Promotions should not be thought of as something which nullifies or mutes the effect of inflation giving you a pay cut each year. Because, like I said, under a sound money system where there's no inflation, such as we had for roughly the first 125 years in America before the Federal Reserve was created, it's a situation where you don't take a pay cut each year because there's no inflation, and yet you still get promotions and raises, assuming you work hard and advance in the company. And since raises are typically earned, it's not like you get them for free. And thus today, everyone should be getting a 5% cost of living raise each year for doing nothing extra, without getting a promotion or anything like that. Anyone who's getting less than a 5% cost of living raise each year is actually taking a pay cut each year. Even those who get raises are taking a pay cut, because with the raise, like if you get a promotion and then you get a raise, comes greater responsibility and such. And so that greater pay comes at a cost, such as the job being more stressful. But they're still making less and less each year, the person is, who got the raise, who got the promotion. They're still making less and less each year in terms of what their yearly income will buy. In other words, they're being paid, they're being paid less purchasing power every year, right? Even though they got a promotion, that decline of what their money will buy, when they're getting paid, whatever they're getting paid, a lot or a little, they're still getting paid less than the year before because of inflation, you see? It means their money buys less than it did the year before, right? Which is essentially a pay cut, right? And it's not like most people get a raise every year. Even incredibly intelligent, talented, good-looking people typically don't get a raise every year. They might rocket up the corporate ladder in the beginning, but the higher they get, the longer it takes to make it up to the next rung on the ladder. You see? Because now you're competing with even more talented people, and the competition is even fiercer. And so, the higher you get on the corporate, ladder, the harder it is to get to the next rung above you. So even very talented people do not get a raise every year. And once they get stuck for a few years in one position, unless they're getting a 5% or greater raise each year, they're suffering a pay cut every single year. No matter how much money you make each year as your salary or your wages, it remains true that you're taking a pay cut every year if you're not getting a 5% raise every year to offset inflation. Or like if inflation is 10% per year, if you're getting anything less than a 10% raise each year, you're taking a pay cut. Or if inflation is 3% per year, if you're getting anything less than a 3% raise each year, you're taking a pay cut every year. And even if you do get a 5% or more raise each year for doing nothing extra and are just being given that raise in order to compensate for inflation, right? So that you're getting paid the same amount in purchasing power each year, that you're still having your let's see here. So you're getting paid the same amount of purchasing power each year. I think I said that wrong. Let me try it again. Maybe I missed a word here or something. And even if you do get a 5% or more raise each year for doing nothing extra and are just giving that raise in order to compensate you for inflation so that you're getting paid the same amount in purchasing power each year, you were still having your savings depreciated at a 5% yearly rate, right? Like, so even if you are getting that 5% a year to make up for inflation, that still doesn't still doesn't, spare your savings from being depreciated at 5% per year. So you're losing money every year due to inflation unless you both get a 5% or greater raise each and every year and you save all your money in gold, silver, or whatever else is immune to inflation. So inflation is a really sinister, evil tax, much like compounding interest in reverse. And it doesn't just benefit the government, it benefits the corporations also, because they just raise the prices of their products to keep up with inflation. So they keep making the same amount of profit in terms of purchasing power each year because they keep raising their prices along with inflation. But they don't give all their employees 5% raises each year to make up for inflation, now do they? No, they don't. And so the cost of their product is constantly going up, but the amount that they're paying their workforce is not constantly going up, and so essentially what they're paying their workforce is actually going down. It should therefore, in other words, they're making a greater and greater profit margin each year because of the cost of their labor going down, 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 because they're paying their employees the same amount, but they're charging more for their products. You see, it should therefore be no surprise that people have a much lower standard of living these days than they used to have back 70 years ago and earlier. But regarding what I was saying earlier about wages, let's say you're a famous actor and you get paid $10 million for every movie you make. This is, I guess, not a new principle from what I was talking about earlier, but I'm going to illustrate what I was talking about. Let's say you're a famous actor and you get paid $10 million for every movie you make. For every movie you make. You don't take points on the movie. You just take an upfront one-time payment for each movie to act in that movie, right? You get paid, let's say you're a big star and you get paid $10 million for every movie you make. And you make one movie every year, and so you thus make, $10 million a year. And let's say you do so, let's look at the earnings of such an actor over 10 years. He makes $100 million over 10 years, $10 million each year, right? For a total of $100 million earned during that decade, since he's making the same amount each year. But like I was saying earlier, since he's making the same amount each year, he's actually taking a pay cut each and every year. The second year, he actually, in purchasing power, only earned $9.5 million. The third year, he actually only earned $9,025,000 in purchasing power. The fourth year, the actor actually earned only $8,583,000 in purchasing power. The fifth year, he actually only earned $8,145,000 in purchasing power. The sixth year, he actually earned in purchasing power $7,737,000 in purchasing power. The seventh year, he actually earned, and this is not with like investing the money, this is just what he's earning in terms of purchasing power, right? Like let's say he spends all his money every year, right? He doesn't save anything. We're talking about what he could buy with what he makes every year. The seventh year, he actually earned only about $7,350,000 in purchasing power. The eighth year, the actor earned only about $6,983,000 in purchasing power. He made $10 million, but compared to the first $10 million, this was only the first $10 million, what in purchasing power, like what the dollar was worth back when he made that first movie. He could have spent, $6,983,000 that first year, and he would have been able to buy the same amount that he can buy now in the eighth year with $10 million. You see, in the ninth year, he actually only earned $6,634,000 in purchasing power. The 10th year, the actor only earned about $6,302,000 in purchasing power. So you can see the amount that you earn each year is being lowered more and more each year if you're not getting a raise. In only 10 years, you're making a little more than half of what you made 10 years earlier. And remember, we're talking about purchasing power because that's all that really matters. Who cares if you earn more money than the year before? It is if you can buy less with it than the year before. All that matters is how much purchasing power you're being paid each year and how much purchasing power you have saved. The dollar amount is absolutely irrelevant. And that goes for the yuan and the rupee and any other currency. Thanks to inflation and the corporations' greedy refusal to pay their employees a 5% raise each year, the result is that in only 10 years, your yearly earnings are almost half as much in purchasing power as they were a mere 10 years earlier. And of course, at the same time, any savings you have are similarly being decreased in purchasing power. The same dollars in savings are being taxed over and over and over again, unless they're in gold or silver or something like that. The only way to be immune from this is with precious metals. Although I suppose non-rare metals like copper and expensive paintings and other such things can also hold their value as well, especially over a long period like 40 years or more, right? Although with copper, the same reason that it was always not very good for money applies now. Like, unless you're super rich and own a ton of land and can afford to store a huge amount of copper, it's just absolutely prohibitive because it takes up too much space. So it's not that copper is not a good store of money. I mean, not a good store of value like silver or gold are. It's just that it takes up too much space. But if you're rich and you have a ton of space, I guess theoretically you could save in copper. And maybe if they outlaw gold and silver in the future, rich people will be saving in copper. They'll be buying tons and tons of copper, and just saving it, maybe in big giant doré bars or however they mine copper, you know what I mean? Before it's refined. Probably just buy a ton of huge bars and just stack them up in a giant warehouse. You know what I mean? Because the rich will be able to afford to do that, but a regular guy living in a little apartment won't be able to store enough copper to actually save any kind of decent amount, or else eventually he'd be running out of space in his apartment, and he would not have even saved all that much money yet. You see? So it's not that copper's not good, it's just that it takes up too much space. Same thing with, iron or any other thing that, is non-perishable, basically, but, which is low in price. It could be good for saving money in, but not in physical form, at least. But, you get into the ETFs and stuff, then you're talking about you're helping the bad guys manipulate the price, and that's not good either, because then you're working against your own interests, of course, unless the price is just barely above the mining cost, in which case, then they can't really drive it below the mining cost for long, and then I guess you're safe. You can buy property and rent it out as well to preserve your purchasing power, but then you have to make sure that the tenants are not ruining the house or the duplex that they're renting from you. You also have upkeep expenses, you have to fix the roof periodically, etc. And you also have to pay property tax, which means you can't just let the land or the house go unused, or else the property will be a money pit. It'll be costing you money instead of making you money. Gold, silver, platinum, etc. are much easier. You just buy them as cheap as you can, and then you hold them as long as you can, or at least until that particular wealth cycle indicates that you should buy property in stocks because of them being undervalued and precious metals being overvalued at that particular moment in time. Then you sell your gold, or at least some of it, preferably not all of it, and then you buy stocks or houses, and then when stocks and houses become overvalued while you're holding them, and when gold is undervalued again, you then sell your property stocks when they're overvalued and buy gold again at that time, because at that time gold will be undervalued. Watch Mike Maloney's videos if you want to know more about this. Look for his recent video with the phrase wealth cycle in it. That's the video to watch, although he's talked about this in past videos as well. But basically I wanted to make this video to point out that inflation is sort of like compounding interest in reverse, and it works on both your savings and your wages, unlike the enriching of compounding interest, which only works on your savings, not on your wages, and is irrelevant as long as you're suffering the ravages of inflation due to the country using fiat currency. If compounding interest is so powerful, then let's all acknowledge and let's all force the government to also acknowledge that inflation is compounding interest in reverse and is a horrible form of theft. Just as much as compounding interest on your savings or stocks is a good thing, if there is no inflation eating into those profits. This has been Redshift. Don't be stupid. Don't trust government. Don't trust fiat currency. Trust gold. Trust silver. Maybe trust best of the best cryptos like Bitcoin and Monero. And maybe trust some of your family members. And it's probably a good idea to trust the stupidity of the sheeple and bet against what the sheeple bet on. And also bet on some of the things that the sheeple bet against. But don't trust the sheeple, and don't trust the government, and don't trust the dollar. And for God's sake, don't trust the corporations either. Peace for all good people and peace trucks for all bad people like promiscuous men who are literally the cause of gynocentrism.